Good evening and welcome. I'm Lex Runsman of the Linfield English Department, and it's my privilege and pleasure to introduce a once and continuing esteemed colleague, wonderful writer and friend, Barbara Drake, a person who is more than anyone responsible for the current success of Linfield's creative writing major. She is an accomplished essayist, as her book Peace at Heart demonstrates. She has authored a widely used and important textbook writing poetry. But more important this evening is the fact of Barbara's new book of poems from Windfall Press, Driving 100, copies of which are available after the reading, and I bet if you ask nicely, she'll sign her name in them. The preface to her poetry writing textbook reads in part, "I am delighted when someone talks about picking it up for a minute and putting it down an hour later." She's talking about the textbook, but that delight could easily apply to any of her books of poems. This little book, Bees in Wet Weather, was a gift from Barbara the same year that I arrived at Linfield. It starts with this short poem titled Dollar with a Message. At Barb's barbecue in Olympia, I got $1 back in change with a message written on it, not to be used for drugs. At first I felt defensive, like, hey, I don't use drugs, no way. Or, officer, I was not speeding. Later I thought, what a good idea, and sat down to write interdictions, not for bombs, not for bribes, not for items of questionable taste, etc., on all my little bills. So, okay, even this little poem offers the features I like best in all her work. A speaker alert to interesting coincidence, like a barbecue named Barb's, and attuned to the music of words, i.e. 4 B's in Barb's barbecue, which is pretty, I mean, that's got to be a record of some sort. A diction that's sure and clear, a sense of that significance that might actually be found alive every day, and hardest of all, I think, a voice that says what it says and often uses humor to make its strongest assertions in ways that reverberate, like, what would you put on your $1 bills? Please welcome Barbara Drake.
You did such a good job. You want to read the rest of them? That was good. Well, this book seems like it was a long time in coming for various reasons, in part because some of the poems in it are fairly old and they just never found their way into a book. Because I try to see some kind of thread to make it look like a collection and not just a miscellaneous bunch of stuff that you threw together. And then others are very new, so it was written, the poems were written over quite a long time. And the first one, while it was not written as long ago as it's the subject, will help you see what the principle was in putting the book together, I hope. And it is Driving 100. We went in 1956 in Sarah's boyfriend's car out on the new highway south of Coos Bay toward Millington, named for a mill, and the Shingle House Slough, where years later someone's father's ashes would be scattered, his last wish. We went in Sarah's boyfriend's car, a black convertible, and she, wishing to try on speed, drove faster, pushing the speedometer to 60, 70, 80, as we screamed and laughed and held ourselves down in the seats without seat belts. Our hair in the wind lashed us like something breaking over a waterfall, and afraid our young meat and bones would be scattered, we screamed at Sarah, slow down, Sarah." And then she did 90, laughing. "He'll kill me if he ever finds out, you guys, don't tell," and pushed the pedal down and held it as we went fast and faster, screaming and dying and laughing at Sarah until the needle stood at 100. And Sarah relented, and we chided her then and began to breathe again at 60, 50, 40, did a U at 20, turned around at the cutoff to Coquille. I almost died, we all said. I'll never do that again. And our flesh settled down to go on living as we secretly thanked her like a goddess for the terrible experience. Now, I read that once with one of my grandchildren in the audience, and I looked at him, I said, and don't you ever do that. And then another time, my mother, who's 91, was in the audience, and I felt sort of guilty because she didn't know about it. You know, so we maintain our place in the hierarchy of the ages. And I even sent the poem to Sarah after many years, and I thought she would write back and say, I did never do that, but she didn't. She agreed, it was all true. Now, I would say, can I tell you what I think the theme of the book is? Is sort of pushing the limit in lots of ways. And that doesn't mean that it's a book about terribly wild experiences, but it's just, I always felt that they were all the books, the poems I put in here were sort of fell into that definition of pushing the limit a little. And so just to continue that theme of cars, I wanted to go back to one that's not the same type of poem, but it's a rather recent one, fairly recent, as poetry goes, that I did working from photographs of my relatives when my brother was working on a family history and putting together things, and I looked at these photographs of my grandparents and on my father's side. And so there are 5 different pictures. It's Mysteries of the Picture Box. James Thomas Robertson, my grandfather at age 18, wears a suit and tie. The collar of his shirt has rounded corners. The tie itself is light-colored and has a tie tack or a bit of design, not sure which. His face is handsome but sad and serious under the curly brushback hair. I imagine his hair reddish like my father's. 34 years later, a little past 50, in 1939, the year I was born, he will die of a sudden fever, possibly from encephalitis. Death was mysterious in those days, still is. Number 2. In this one, grandfather sits on his horse. A rifle dangles from the pommel of his saddle, points toward the earth. A coil of rope flops on the horse's shoulder. Grandfather's pants are felted wool. He wears a wide, high belt and collarless button shirt. In his broad brim hat, he looks the perfect cowboy. Next to him, the hired man, Sweet Pea, sits on a mule and wears a sombrero. Sweet Pea, too, is draped with gear, rifle in his hands. What were they up to? The guns, the ropes, the horses? Behind them, a line of willows, and through the branches of the trees, the eternal flat line of Kansas, like a stopped heart. 3. Grandpa looks happy in this one. The horse is rearing for the picture, and grandfather's shirt is dark, collared. He is wearing chaps, and his hat is white naturally, for my grandfather was surely the good guy. The horse's tail sweeps the ground, and its hooves are white as grandpa's hat. 4. Together, my grandparents, Grace and James, stare out of this picture. James, a shy man, it seems, looks slightly to the camera's right. I cannot see into his eyes. I won't be born for years. Grace looks at me directly. I will know her. She will live briefly to know me. He will not. And the last one, 5. The whole family is in this picture, and everyone is pleased with the new car. You can tell by the jaunty way their hands sit on their hips. Even Dad at 7 or 8, dressed for the occasion in knee-length black pants and a little jacket. A boy-sized necktie and big cap cocked over one eye, stands with arms akimbo, as if a desire for action, speed, and travel were being translated into an unnatural pause. The camera records this moment of awe. James, Grace, and the boys. The 4 of them stare at the camera and stand jauntily in front of the new vehicle. Its sleek, long hood like the muzzle of a dog, or the body of the century's newest animal. Well, you know, it was funny to look at these pictures and see all these horses, and then all of a sudden everybody's there. The car. More limits here of a different kind, not so happy maybe, but interesting. Perseids, you know, maybe I should shower in August. Perseids, August 1945. One night it was said there would be falling stars all night. I was 6 and allowed to stay up late to see them. My friend Billy and I stood in the street in front of our house. The street was safe back then, and watched stars fall. One after another, they streaked across the dark sky. We counted them until it seemed there were few stars left. We wondered which would be next. We wondered where they fell. When our mothers gathered us in, we looked back over our shoulders, amazed yet fearing that the sky would never again be as bright as before the stars fell out of it, like spilled salt, like sand, like scratches on film or bubbles in a water glass left all night on the bedstand. Now the sky was so much darker than it had been. Now, if you make the connection with August 1945, and I remember thinking that the stars were actually falling, and it was the same time I was hearing all this stuff from grown-ups talking, and you're a little kid, and you hear, what are they talking about? Nuclear, atomic bombs, they might blow up the whole world, you know, and so on. So it felt like things were somehow not the same, and they weren't. I looked up the Perseids for that year because I remembered it being so astonishing, and 1945 was an outstanding year for the number. It was like 200 an hour or 190 an hour or something that you could see, so it was a huge display. I remember standing in the street in Klaska and I and looking up, and one after another.